You're listening to the Straight to Video podcast with Rob Lane.
What's going on, and a big warm welcome to episode 199 of the Straight to Video podcast. That's right, almost 200 episodes of this show. Unbelievable, at least for me, because I remember when I started it, just hitting 10 episodes was a huge milestone, or seeing other podcasts reaching something like 50 episodes. I was like, wow, that's crazy numbers. But thanks to you lot for always coming back, and for my guests for being so much fun and entertaining. We're right on the cusp of that landmark 200, and it means so much to have you on board this ride. Right now though, we got a good one to see out the hundreds as I speak to one of the most interesting and creative guests I've had on the show so far, as I got to chat with singer-songwriter Chris Ballew, who many of you will know as the lead singer and two-string bassist of the wonderful band The Presidents of the United States of America. You know, Lump, Peaches and all that good stuff. Back when grunge and the Seattle scene was all-encompassing in the 1990s, I liked some of the bands, but the ones I tended to gravitate to were a little more melodic and hooky, at least to my ears. So I will be listening to Soul Asylum, Collective Soul, Stone Temple Pilots, Gin Blossoms, and of course The Presidents, because when it came to fun and hooks, they had it all. During our chat, we cover a lot of Chris's career, obviously some Presidents talk, and particularly how they handled the business side of their journey, which is pretty inspiring. But we also talk about his massively successful kids project, Casper Babypants, and his latest solo work, which sees him releasing 2 albums a year in January and July. The latest of which, Primitive God, is available now from his website chrisballew.org, and like everything he releases, guess what? It's all free. Crazy, right? Told you this guy was inspiring. Such a creative force, and making music because it truly is a passion for him and he loves to share. Before we dive in though, a couple of things. The folk at Dead Skull Coffee are offering you 15% off any order through their website deadskullcoffee.co.uk if you simply add the promo code STV on checkout. Dead Skull Coffee are a true independent rock and roll coffee company producing some of the finest ground or full bean coffee out there, so why not check them out? That's promo code STV when you place an order through deadskullcoffee.co.uk. Also, shout to my buddy Anthony Justice over in the USA for signing up to the Straight to Video Patreon, which bags him early heads up on guests, access to a private Facebook group, some exclusive merch, and just the knowledge that he's helping grow and support this show as it cracks 200 episodes. I really appreciate the support, mate, and if you too would like to get on board, then please visit patreon.com/STVpod for all the info. Okay, enough pimping. Let's dive into a chat with a great dude with some amazing stories as we talk on episode 199 of the Straight to Video podcast with the wonderful Chris Ballew.
Oh my God, that was epic. I got to say, that was one of the most epic rescheduling of a podcast experiences I've ever had. I'm sorry about that.
It's so good, mate.
Good news is my teeth are all top notch and good shape, thanks to my dentist.
I always say, it probably sounds crazy, teeth and toes. Look after your teeth and toes.
Oh, I like that. That's kind of like P's and Q's, but teeth and toes. Do you know where that came? That actually was originated in the UK, P's and Q's.
Really?
Yeah. I don't know if you say that expression over there.
Yeah, watch your P's and Q's, yeah.
Watch your P's and Q's means pints and quarts. If a fight broke out in a pub, they'd yell out, mind your P's and Q's.
I'm learning shit.
There you go. We're already learning.
How are you, Chris?
I'm fantastic. How are you, Rob?
Yeah, I'm pretty good. Thanks ever so much for doing this. And I believe we're on the eve of the release of your brand new album, Primitive God, the follow-up to Soul Unfolded.
That's correct, yes. My third solo record under my own name. I'm putting out 2 a year. I'm doing July and January every year because I've just got so many songs brewing. I can't control them all or the urge to stop. I have no ability to stop. But yeah, it's coming out. It's called Primitive God. This has been really fun. I've rediscovered synthesizers, which I loved as a teenager. I had a whole array of, monophonic synthesizers in the 80s and drum machines. And it's a whole palette to my musical vocabulary that I just kind of hadn't been exploring for many, many years. And I got to give credit to John Roderick from The Long Winters. He has a podcast and he was talking about the Juno 106 and how great it is. And I got one. And it's just it's making me time travel.
Yeah.
Actually, some of the songs on these new solo records are songs I wrote in the 80s. But I don't know. I had a bad sort of fake English accent when I sang back then. I was trying to, I loved a lot of new wave bands from the UK. And so I was trying to be one of them.
How was those ideas stored? Was it literally recordings or just handwritten lyrics, or how was it going back?
I have recordings. I digitized a ginormous box of cassettes many years ago. So I just have this huge library of scraps and attempts to write songs from when I was a teenager. They will never see the light of day.
Do you sometimes surprise yourself, though, when you hear it? Wow.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. I've found often, no matter what phase I'm in, whether it's a President's phase, a Casper Babypants kids music phase, or this new psychedelic phase I'm in, I go back and I listen to my scraps and bits, and there are breadcrumbs for whatever I'm doing. There are enough breadcrumbs that I'm cherry picking old ideas along with writing new stuff. Yeah, I'm always leaving myself clues for the next phase as I go.
I love that. Leaving clues. That's great.
Yeah, the big lesson there is if you're a songwriter, don't censor yourself. Write all kinds of songs. If you're in a heavy metal band and a country song pops up, go ahead and write it because you never know where you're going to end up.
That's awesome. You have a career that's seen every kind of music release, though, from the big label releases to kind of becoming your own cottage DIY industry of putting out music. What's the anticipation like now for you? It must be a totally different headspace.
You mean with an album release?
Yeah.
Really low expectations, super low. I mean, I've really had a great ride with the Presidents and Casper Babypants. Those two things, they're just out there generating income that I live off of. So these days, I fancy myself more of a hobbyist. I'm at the height really of my songwriting and recording and performing musical guitar playing or whatever chops. Everything's working 100%. But I also at the same time have this funny comfort with receding into the shadows. I'm kind of equating it to I'm a guy who has a job, and on the weekends I go into my wood shop and I make chairs. I just make chairs because I like making chairs and it makes me feel good and the chairs are beautiful and I take my time. And so really with all this music I'm doing now, I'm just making chairs. I have a little mantra. I say, nobody cares. I'm just making chairs. And I know some people care, but if I say to myself, nobody cares, it kind of relieves pressure. It has been an interesting thing, though, managing expectations. Sometimes I've had collaborations and musical projects with people where the expectations crushed the project. So I've experienced the whole wide spectrum of the invasion of expectations in the process.
Are you thinking like we're on the eve of this new album, you're going to put it out there? Do you kind of think, what are people going to make of the music?
Yeah.
Anticipate the feedback?
Yeah, I'm definitely making it for people. I'm not really being self-indulgent with it. I'm not being messy and sloppy. And, I'm really focused on what the listener will experience. And I'm trying to make music where you can either take a nap to it or dance to it. It's kind of droney and psychedelic and meditative, but it's also got enough hills and valleys that you could just listen. I kind of am sliding the slider between pop songcraft and drone and kind of back and forth. So all that's with the listener's experience in mind. I really pay attention to sequencing albums, which I bet is at this point a completely antique concern.
Do you still have where the A-side finishes and the B-side starts?
Oh, yeah. In fact, I have two sort of co-producers on these things. These two guys I play songs for, and they give me feedback. And one of them, Mark Heberlein, he's a serious record collector and a very heavy vinyl collector. And he always brings in now that's right where side one would end and side two would start. So even though that is irrelevant, these are fun games for me to play. It's right now, it's just this game. But that said, I do light up in my little heart when somebody says they like the new stuff. It feels good. As I did with Casper, I'm just sort of allowing this music to go out in the world on its own and find its way. And I'm not pushing it or promoting it or spending money on ad campaigns. I'm just kind of letting it flow and seeing where it goes.
I think you said there's no plans to bring any of this new material into the live environment. You kind of threw with that for a while. Is that something that was really brought to life with lockdown, time away from it, and you're like, I'm not really missing it that much? I know a lot of people in bands have been in that situation. They've had such a constant, for like years, sometimes decades, just a constant machine of recording, touring. Then they have this break out of nowhere and it's like, wow, I'm not really missing that.
Yeah, you're right. It's kind of, I guess, becoming a universal sort of lifestyle meme at this point. But yeah, I had a full schedule of shows when the pandemic hit. And in my gut, I was just like, I need a year off. I looked at my schedule and went, ugh. And then the pandemic hit. I was like, oh, thank you, God, to quote Animal House. And then I realized how much of that experience was stress. And it's the good kind of stress where the reward is, of course, the experience that you hope for, where you get on stage. And at least for me, it was like, I would feel like I'd dissolve and the crowd would dissolve and we'd just be one big, it was incredible when it was clicking because it was like otherworldly, maybe sort of a seed for the thematic lyrics I'm writing now, which is kind of like dissolving and meditative and stuff like that. But yeah, 85% of it is just like boring paperwork. And, especially when I was running my own thing with the Casper Babypants thing, I was booking all the shows and advancing them. I was the roadie, I was the merch guy, I was the sound engineer, I was the performer, the accountant, the distributor. Anyway, it is kind of, I guess, a gift of the pandemic. I always find that you never know when something seems like it's bad news. And of course, I don't want to, reduce that it was bad news for a lot of people who got sick and didn't make it, of course. But there's a level to it where it's that dynamic where there's that old Buddhist story called The Farmer and the Horse, where the farmer is gifted a horse and everyone says, yay, you got a horse. The next day, his son is riding the horse and falls off and breaks his leg. And everyone says, too bad about your son's leg. The next day, the army conscriptor's coming through the village to get young men for the army, and he can't be drafted because he has a broken leg. Yay! It just goes on and on. So you never know when good and bad are relative or objective or subjective. I can never remember which one is which. There's some sort of objective.
I'd love to trace some of your early journey and some of the things that set you on your path to being a musician and such a wholly creative person. For I think that most of us, our earliest memories just of anything are maybe around 4 years old. I think I have a few snapshots of things before then, but you specifically remember falling in love with the Beatles music when you were just 2.5 and the Sgt. Pepper album. That's nuts.
I know.
Is that your earliest memory, do you think?
My earliest memory is maybe right around the same time, banging on a piano with a hammer, making just like divots.
Is that because you got told off straight afterwards?
Well, I didn't know what the keyboard was for, obviously, because I banged on it and got this that kind of haunty where all the strings vibrate at once. And I liked it. And I was just like, I remember banging and banging, banging. And then years later, I was practicing on that piano as I started lessons at the age of 4. I did lessons from 4 to 14. And I always kind of glanced over at those divots and thought, that's where it all started. But yeah, the Beatles, the Sgt. Peppers, I wasn't a fanboy. I wasn't a fan child or something, whatever I was, a fan toddler. I didn't understand that they were a phenomenon. It wasn't about that. It was about that album being this kaleidoscopic journey through all these different worlds. Each song was its own world and you were fully immersed in it. And then you get off at the next stop and it's another world, And that really I wanted to ride that ride all day and I did. And then later I was like, I don't want to just ride the ride. I want to conduct my own ride. So that was sort of the purpose of music for me, is to transcend reality and make you travel in your mind or in your body or whatever. So, yeah.
Was you there with the album cover as well? Was it just the music or was you there with this album cover in front of you as well?
I think the album cover was great because it was endlessly fun to stare at. I didn't know who these people were. I didn't know whether the wax figures of the Beatles were the Beatles or if the guys in the marching band suits were the Beatles. Are there two Beatles? I was really confused. I remember looking at the gatefold and going, I don't know their names. Who are they? I think I had John and George mixed up for a while, and I had to really work at who's now, okay, that's Paul.
And was it your older brother that brought that album?
Yeah, apparently he bought it from my parents in December of 1967. It came out June 1st, 1967. So a few months later, he bought it for them for Christmas. It was the hot album. You know, as far as I know, they never really clicked with it. They just filed it away with their other kind of easy listening albums. I remember at one point thinking, well, you know, I happened to pull out Sgt. Pepper's, listen to it. And then I thought, well, I wonder if their other records are as good. And I pull out there, I'm like, no, they're not. I remember trying to like Andy Williams and Don Ho and like all this easy listening stuff. And I was like, no.
No comparison.
Not the same.
Did your brother introduce you to any other bands later on?
No, he didn't, actually. This is the one, you know, he didn't intend to introduce me to any. He was trying to introduce our parents to it, as I understand it. But actually, I'm going to see him this Saturday at a family gathering, and I'm going to corroborate this whole thing. I have this story that he bought it for my parents. I think that's true, but I might need to amend this story. You never know. It's crazy how elastic and weird memory is, but I do remember being able to mimic, what song was it? There's Sgt. Pepper's and there's Little Help from My Friends. Oh, is it When I'm 64? No, that's on the side two. That's on side two. Anyway, that song, I could imitate his voice. I could lock in and double his voice. And so I worked on that. It's kind of how I learned to sing, really, is like locking into his vocal. I got caught up there because I was thinking it was on side one, but it was side two.
Have they been a mainstay band for you ever since? Do you remember how old you are when you kind of began taking in their other music, or was it just this album for years and years?
Just this album for, I think from the time I was about 2.5 or 3 years old till I was maybe 7. I think I was in like second grade. And I got the Yellow Submarine soundtrack, which was a curveball because half of that was classical music, which I loved. And my mom had turned me on to, and I was playing as a pianist. So I kind of got it. But Yellow Submarine is a good follow-up to Sgt. Pepper's because those songs they're like some of the castaways from making Sgt. Pepper's and that same era and a little after. So yeah, I dug it. And that was the first record I bought with my own money.
Ah, nice.
I went to the record store with my own money and bought that record.
What was the name of the record store?
It was Peaches Records and Tapes in Seattle, Washington. I guess maybe that's where I got the idea to write a song called Peaches later.
There you go. Breadcrumbs.
Breadcrumbs, yeah. Speaking of breadcrumbs, exactly.
Other than like your piano lessons, was music as a listener something a constant through your childhood, like pre-teenager, or was it just a soundtrack to later become this all-consuming thing, which music normally does? I mean, for me, I always enjoyed music, but it wasn't until like my mid to late teens that I really began being consumed with hard rock music and wanted to be in a band. But was it always there for you? Yeah, well, really, again, it was just the Beatles. I remember if I mowed lawns and saved for a month, I could buy one Beatles record. They were $4.97, and I could get $5 together and have 3 gumballs afterwards. So it was really just immersed in their songcraft and their sound for years and years. And so I wasn't really I was writing weird quasi-classical music when I was a younger kid because I was doing piano lessons, and it didn't occur to me to pick up a guitar until much later or to think of myself as a songwriter. I was just really immersed in the Beatles world. I guess it wasn't until, later when I picked up my dad's guitar and kind of figured out, oh, that sounds nice, and that sounds nice, and that sounds nice. I didn't know I was figuring out chords. I still have that guitar and I still write songs on it, actually. But that was when I first started thinking to myself, it's like, oh, I could participate in this world. So I started doing it. That was probably around 12 or so. And then around 14, I got an electric guitar and was just like, oh, bam, that's amazing. Like, wow. And then I got into synthesizers and I was going crazy with those and like old drum machines and that kind of stuff. And then I really started in earnest writing songs with a good friend of mine named Dale. And we had a duo called Mute Testimony. He had taken some psychedelic drugs and realized that inanimate objects have stories to tell. And that was Mute Testimony was we were trying to be all kind of, like I said, fake English accents and synthesizers and trying to join a culture we did not belong in. That's so cool. You've still got the original guitar, the first one you started learning on.
Oh, yeah.
You seem to have a lot of your old guitars.
Yeah, all my guitars have stories and stuff. They're very storied.
Pretty materialistic in that way, really attached to things with specific memories at all, or just guitars?
No, really just guitars and photographs. I have a huge bin of photographs, all disorganized. My theory is that's the way the mind works. So if I want to look at photos, I just grab a blob and I jump around in time. But yeah, the guitars, I'm very attached to them. I mean, attachment is a thing that I toy with. There is attachment, like I love this guitar. And then there's like, if it were to be stolen or burn in a fire, I'd live. I'm not going to turn into a ball of mud on the floor.
Did I see though, you still have your original radio?
Yeah. Well, actually now this isn't the original radio. I found it in like a used clothing store. They had weird clothing and electronics. I know you people at home can't see, but it's an old Motorola radio.
Use the booth that we had for me tomorrow.
And I listened to the Casey Kasem countdown. And this is where I first heard the Talking Heads. In the 70s, I was all about this guy. And so I do remember when the Talking Heads Take Me to the River came out and thinking, oh, now that is brand new. What is that? And when Once in a Lifetime came out, oh my God, my head cracked open.
Game over.
Oh, it was so good. But yeah, I found this. So I have it in my studio as like a totem, kind of a reminder.
It sounds so good though. As soon as you turned it on, that could have been off any album intro.
Yeah.
Straight away, just like that.
I'm working on a song. It's gone through a few title changes. It was called Old Radio, then it was called Plastic Radio. Now it's called Voodoo Radio. And Voodoo Radio is about this radio. It'll appear on a future Chris Ballew album, but I'm still obviously trying to figure out the right word combination for it.
Just to touch on something quickly regarding guitars, which was the first guitar that kind of began your initial path to the bass sitar? Because that was an acoustic, right? Which you broke strings.
Well, yeah, that is gone. I destroyed that guitar at some point.
Destroyed it.
Yeah. It was covered with stickers and it had 4 strings on it. I had 6 and then I broke a couple. Couldn't afford to replace them. So I was down to playing a 4-string when I met Mark Sandman from the band Morphine. And this red guitar that I'm pointing at, for all you listeners at home, this was the 2-string that revolutionized my world. It was in his studio. And I picked it up and he played a slide bass 2-string. And this was set up to be a guitar. He was experimenting and seeing if he wanted to do a 2-string as something you could, use the fretboard with, not just slide, because he had the strings raised really high. And I picked it up and just went, oh yeah, here it is. This is my home. Because I immediately realized that I could filter my influences directly through that instrument and it would sound unique and new just because there were only 2 strings. So I couldn't make all the classic harmonic relationships that everybody's heard 1,000 times. And then I got this little guy, which for you listeners at home, I'm pointing at a weird little Japanese kawaii 2-string. That was the one I played on the debut album. So these two are like the father and son or whatever, the parents, the 2-string parents. And I still use them all the time.
Do you have to look after them? Do they take much maintenance or setting up?
No, they just faithfully hang here and wait to be called upon. I've got more too. I mean, again, people can't see, but that's the guitar I played with Beck when I did the first couple of tours with Beck. Bottom line is every guitar has sort of a story and a history. And I love a guitar that has ghosts in it. That's kind of how I describe it. Like one of these guitars, this one over here, this acoustic, I went to the store and I picked it up. I played 2 chords and went, I'll take it, because I could just feel that there were songs in it wanting to come out. It's just a weird gut feeling I have with guitars.
What do you do when you want a new guitar? Do you just go to old second-hand shops then? Or give me the oldest guitar you got?
These days, I'm not into acquiring guitars. I've got my crew is set. I've got my crew. What is it? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I've got one in the house, 10. I've got 10. Some of them are 3 strings, some 2 strings, some 6 strings, some 4 string. So they all have like a purpose and a unique sort of niche they take care of. And that's it. I do have my son, Augie Ballew, is a guitar builder and designer and repairer and player. And he is building me a custom Telecaster to kind of imitate George Harrison's Tele in the Get Back, the Let It Be era. That is one hole in my thing. I don't have a really like solid electric.
How long's he been building guitars?
Oh, man, like 4 years, 5 years. He's 25. He lives up north of Seattle in Bellingham, about an hour and a half north. And he's really good. He's great. Everybody should check out Augie Ballew.
When you were old enough to go out to clubs and gigs, what was the music scene like around town back then? Was you in Seattle or was you kind of on the outskirts of it?
I was kind of on the outskirts. I was across a bridge over a lake, Lake Washington, and I was in a little town called Yarrow Point. It was I kind of isolating. I went through the phase where I was mad at my parents for not living on the city side because it was really hard to go out to a show when I didn't drive yet. I couldn't drink or get into shows because they were all 21. But then right around when I got to be maybe 16 or 17, all ages shows really started taking hold. Seattle was the kind of place where a couple of bands could rent a hall for not very much money, sell tickets for like $2 and put on a 3-band bill and walk out with some money. And it was all ages and it was DIY. That was the first time my eyes were open to the do-it-yourself. Like, wow, these guys just didn't wait around for actual clubs. They just, rented these weird VFW halls and did it themselves.
Was that like punk rock stuff?
Yeah, well, everything really. I was into some new wave bands. There was a band called the Colored Twigs I loved. There's a band called the U-Men, punk rock band, great. A band called the Blackouts, which I just adore. So yeah, it was kind of like this mix of intelligent hardcore punk rock and new wave arty fringy stuff. So it was a good scene. It was really good. And then there was like power pop, like the Fastbacks and the Young Fresh Fellows. And that became more of a building block for what the Presidents fed off of later.
What were some of like the first arena or theater shows you got to go to?
Oh, wow. Well, the very first one was 1981, maybe. Rolling Stones.
You started at a pretty high level.
Yeah, started at a high level, got right down in the front. It wasn't like a Stones or Beatles or a McCartney show would be now with lots of seats. And, it was just a free for all. So many people that I was being moved around and my feet weren't touching the ground. I remember that being like, oh, so this is what happens at shows. And I swear Mick Jagger at one point pointed right and looked right at me as he sang. And I was like, yay.
Who'd you go to that show with?
I don't remember. And I had to skip school to do it. So I don't know how I did it. I was 16, I guess. So I don't remember how I did that, man. It was fantastic. And then I followed that up with The Clash and The Who at the same venue, giant Enormo Dome.
Almost sounds crazy just to list those as your first couple of gigs now.
Yeah. Rolling Stones, Clash, Who. Yeah. Well, and then who was it? T-Bone Burnett opened up for the Stones. Well, the Clash opened up for the Who. I didn't like the Who at the time. I didn't. The Who's always been a little too theater. I don't know what. Like something doesn't resonate. But the Clash, I loved, and so I just watched the Clash right up front. And then while the Who played, because the people I was there with wanted to see the Who, I just ran around being a troublesome punk rocker while the Who played.
What led you to head out cross country from Seattle to the East Coast? Because you landed in Boston for a while and began performing out there.
Well, I got into a school called the State University of New York at Purchase, an art school. It had art, dance, theater, filmmaking, acting, humanities. It was a really amazing school and it was Rockefeller funded. So the tuition was super cheap. My dad gave me $5,000 a year for college in 1983. This school was like $4,400. So I was like, yes, I can afford that. And they gave me a scholarship after I submitted a little portfolio. And so I went to do visual arts and get a Bachelor of Fine Arts. So really, it was like an opportunity to go explore the East Coast, but it was affordable and it was in the woods north of Manhattan. So you could get on a train and be in Manhattan in 40 minutes, but I didn't want to deal with Manhattan every day, try to go to NYU or something like that. So I just planted myself in the woods in New York. It was great. Great school. It still is a great school.
What was some of your early experience of Manhattan in the mid-'80s?
I used to make a jaunt or a trip out of walking the length of Manhattan all night in 1983, 84. I'd walk from the tip all the way up to, I guess, past Harlem, and then I would get on the train and go back. I did that a couple of times. When I had so little money, I'd go down to Manhattan. All I could afford was one pretzel for the whole day. These big, like bready pretzels they had. So I had to be economical. So walking was my entertainment, really. I couldn't afford anything else. I mean, even back then, if you went into a bar, it was like a cover charge and a can of Budweiser was $5, which back then was like $20. But I did have a great experience. My band in college ended up playing at CBGB's twice, and Hilly Crystal liked us, and he told me so. And that, I feel like, that's such a precious memory to me, to play on that stage and interact with him and have him give me the thumbs up. One day at CBGB's too, my girlfriend at the time was a painter and she sold a painting for $200. So we were like, let's take this $200 and go to Manhattan and spend it all. Because we'd gone to Manhattan and only had $2 many a time.
I want something other than a pretzel.
Yeah, something other than a pretzel, like an actual, maybe with mustard. No, we spent it fast on just some, like cabs, food, some drinks. We ended up at CBGB's just sitting there in the daytime having drinks. I don't know if you know a band called the DBs. They were a New York band, but the lead singer of the DBs was there getting slowly drunk in the afternoon. And we ended up sitting at a table with him. And he kind of drunkenly, half eyes cocked, looked at me, and he's like, after talking for a while, he's like, "You're going to make it, kid." He was sort of one of those like grizzled veterans giving me like the positive stink eye.
That's awesome. You're getting all the validation at CBGB's then.
I know. Yeah. Hilly and Peter Holsapple from the DBs.
So cool. You had a band called Egg from 1988, which I read somewhere. I don't know if it might have been on your website, but I read somewhere it was a combination of band, fanzine, and art group.
Yeah.
That to me sounds fascinating. So could you tell me about that?
Yeah. Well, there was a visiting artist at the end of college. So I had a band in college and we all lived together and we're like the Monkees and we played around college and in New York City a couple times. But at the end of senior year, this artist who was visiting invited anyone who wanted a job to come to Boston. And me and my drummer in my band, Phil, and eventually the guitar player in my band, Dale, and this guy, Mike Dwyer, an artist, we all moved to Boston to work for this artist. So we formed a band called Egg. And, a lot of the songs some of them became President's songs. It was kind of proto-President's situation. So yeah, that's how we ended up in Boston. It was just like a job opportunity. And the band I had in college kind of morphed into Egg. And we played on the street, we played in the subway. That was when I first started busking and understanding how important having a literal hook in a song was if you were going to stop somebody who was on their way to work and didn't care about you at all. So I kind of cut my teeth as far as understanding how to reach out and grab somebody with a song, basically.
So what led you to return back to the West Coast? Did you return to Seattle or was it LA? I know you began working with Beck, but so is there quite a time lapse between all that?
Yeah, there's a weird hazy time where I was sort of living in Boston in the summers and painting houses for a living, and then going to Seattle in the winters and just living off the money I made painting houses. It was a couple years, 91, 92-ish. And then eventually one day, I was not having a great time in Boston. I was kind of not eating well. I was having sort of a health system-wide crash. I had eczema and I was all sad and weird and sick. And it was winter and that year, and it was super cold. And I woke up one day and I was like, what am I doing? I'm from Seattle. I need to go home. Seattle's beautiful. Why am I slogging it out on the East Coast? So I bought a VW van, and I drove it all across country, and I had to go the southern route because the heater didn't work and it was January. So I had to go an extra 3,000 miles just to be warm.
How long did that take, the whole journey?
It took a while. I wasn't in a big hurry. I went to Brooklyn for a while. I went to Virginia for a while. I went to New Orleans for a while, and yeah, just sort of bopped around. Went to LA for a bit. And I remember being in Seattle when Nevermind came out and being at the Mudhoney house, and everyone was kind of like, "Oh, hey, everybody listen to this." And they put on Smells Like Teen Spirit. And I, as I remember it, somebody took the needle off after that song, and it was quiet in the room. And someone said, "Everything's going to change." So I was aware of them, and I was listening to them in Boston a lot. I would do this thing where I would put that record on 12 and go to sleep. I loved going to sleep, just being enveloped by all that harmony and fuzz. That's kind of what I'm doing now. In a way, I'm sort of back to trying to overwhelm people's senses so they pass out. So yeah, it was really kind of waking up and realizing I'm from a beautiful place. I need to go home. And the music scene is happening there. So let me go check that out. Boston had a great music scene, but it was kind of competitive. And Seattle always impressed me as more of a sharing resources kind of band members would hop around from different bands. And there was a lot of cross-pollination between bands. Boston was a little more like, who's going to break out? Who's going to win the war of the battle of the bands?
When did the Beck opportunity come along then? Did you get to know him at some point?
Let's see. So when I was busking in Boston, I used to always have a standing rule. There was another busker named Mary Lou Lord. And whenever I passed by her, if I was not busking and she was, I would give her a bathroom break. Because if you have a great spot in Harvard Square, you don't want to pack up all your stuff just to go take a tinkle. So I'd be like, go, Mary Lou. And I'd take her spot and play. And she and I ended up starting a band called Strumpet, which there's a sticker for Strumpet on this guitar right there. And, we played a few gigs. I played that 2-string actually. And then I moved to Seattle, and then she called me and said, hey, my publisher has an act that she just signed named Beck, and he needs musicians for a live band so he can go on tour to support his debut album, which is coming out. And, if you got a phone call saying, hey, there's this guy named, Bobby the Octopus, and he's going to be huge and you should be in his band, you'd be like, Bobby the Octopus? I don't know anything about Bobby the Octopus. I mean, I can't see the future. I was actually in line to be the bass player in a band called Flop, which are friends of mine in Seattle that I love this band. And I was holding in two hands, like, do I want to pursue this Beck guy or be in Flop? And they seemed equal at the time, but of course they were not in retrospect. So she was coming to Seattle with Beck. He's going to do a series of shows in Seattle for a few days, and she wanted to introduce me. So I went down and met him and watched him play solo acoustic. And I felt like I was back in that Sgt. Pepper's world where each song was kind of a world, not sonically as much because it was just him with a guitar, but lyrically, his lyrics were like, if Lucy from Lucy in the Sky took LSD, it would be that psychedelic. And we bonded over that afterwards. I was like, man, I saw movies go off in my head. I see what you're singing. I'm like, hallucinating it as you're singing it. And I want to be part of this and blah, blah, blah. There's more to that story. We ended up the next night, his backing track for Loser broke. And I ended up jumping on stage, like spontaneously. And we had a harmonica duel and we played keyboards with our noses. And we just had this we ended up with harmonicas all over our mouths, wrestling on the ground. And
it's like, this is my guy.
Yeah, it was a moment of pure freedom. So he called me a few days later. I went down to Olympia and I was on the One Foot in the Grave record. That was my audition. I played slide and I didn't know how to play slide. I went to the store. I bought a guitar. I bought a slide, actually this slide right here. And then I moved to LA and I lived with him. I was the only band member not from LA. So he graciously let me live with him. So we 4-tracked together. We wrote songs together. We drove all over LA talking about his transformation from guy living in a cardboard box, working at a video store, to signing a record deal and touring worldwide. That was really interesting. It was like going to fame school. And then eventually I quit. I did 2 tours with Beck and the Presidents had already started. So I went back and then we did our own arc. So it was kind of like I went to fame school and then I got to graduate and do my own experience. It was pretty perfect.
When the Presidents were born, what was the city like at the time? Was the alternative grunge movement in full force still? Or because I think you said it was time for someone to come and kick the door in and bring some fun.
I was into grunge. I loved the music. In fact, I was trying to write songs like Nirvana before Nevermind came out. I had this kind of, this same fuzzy background, but it was me with a 4-string acoustic with a contact mic and a distortion pedal and a 4-track. It wasn't a band. But when I heard Nevermind, I was just like, oh, that is way better than what I was trying to do. I'll just listen to this record. And, Kurt Cobain had died by the time the Presidents set foot on a stage. So there was an arc that felt like it, the initial energy bubble had arced and burst. In a way, there was, subsequent energy bubbles and more great music kept coming out. But it was sort of a time where I think people were going to shows just because they wanted to see the next big thing. I mean, all the clubs were full every night because everyone was just like, okay, now what? And so in that, okay, now what fertile ground of having an audience standing right there, we just sort of took hold, and people responded. And I think it's because we sort of took Seattle back to where it was before grunge, where it was like Paul Revere and the Raiders, the Wailers, the Kingsmen, Louie. Oh, man. The Young Fresh Fellows, more recently, the Fastbacks, party rock. So we just kind of were like, all right, let's do that. But, because I had already been writing songs that had an edge to them before Nevermind came out, there's an edge sprinkled into the President's stuff that kind of keeps it from being fully goofball. I felt like the songs, we kind of decided if we're going to play 2-string and 3-string guitars and have this tiny drum set and play these silly songs, we have to be tight. We have to be good. We can't be just frivolous and silly. We have to also have a little bit of gravitas to us somewhere, a little bit of angst or poetry or longing or whatever, So I think we managed to bottle that.
You described it as FUNge.
Yeah.
Which I'd love a t-shirt with that on.
FUNge. I wish we had thought of that back in the day. I only thought of that 5 years ago.
Oh, man.
Because we were sitting around we need to be called something, it's rock and roll, really, but that's too broad, Anyway, FUNge, darn it.
I mean, you were such a one-of-a-kind band. Was you happy with how the label marketed the band in the way the videos came out and album artwork? Or was you working alongside them? Did you have a lot of input in that side of it as well?
Yeah, that was all us. We basically said...
Because they didn't have any idea what to do.
No, we were so weird. I mean, that album is so bizarre. Like, the recording quality is weird. The songs are weird. We looked weird. We weren't your typical band, a bald guy, lead singer. What the hell? So, yeah, it was really us driving the creative thing. We made that album cover in my bedroom with a light, with a Frisbee, and these three. Actually, hold on a second. I'm going to go over here. I have, and this is, again, people won't see this, but maybe I have the guys from the album cover right here. See, there's the dudes. We put these guys on a shirt, like a weird psychedelic shirt, and used a Frisbee for a filter on a light. And Dave Dieterer took the picture for the cover. And we had a clear idea of what we wanted it to be, how we wanted it laid out. And and we worked on the videos with Roman Coppola, Francis Ford Coppola's son. He had vision, and he made great videos for us and terrible videos for us. He was either like spot on or it's too dark and really boring. Yeah. So the label really was reduced to just like, you guys take care of the mechanics, like get the videos on MTV, get us out there, get us touring, distribute the records, that kind of stuff.
That's quite exciting, really. Is your experience of a major label, is it positive?
Well, in a way it was, because Dave Dieterer, our guitar player, really did a great job with the negotiation, and Jason too. I mean, I was following their lead a lot, but we licensed the record to Columbia for 7 years. So long time ago, we got the record back.
Not some like crazy 25-year deal or something like that.
No. We did that instead of taking a big, avalanche of cash up front. We're like, let's just keep our lives. Let's get enough. We got I think the band got 10 grand a month for a year or something to pay our rent, pay our bills, pay for our practice space, get some new gear if we needed it, that kind of stuff. But we didn't want a big advance. We didn't want life to change or be crazy. We always toured with this idea, like, let's come home with money.
Friggin' smart, man.
Oh man, we were a lean machine. We had our roles. Dave was the guy that read all the contracts and negotiated. Jason was late night PR. He would go out and get drunk into the wee hours with all the important people from labels and publishing companies. I was creative. I would stay home and 4-track and write new songs and work on, bringing new material in. So we were like a three-headed monster, and we defined our roles all with the goal of being efficient, keeping it simple. If we felt like we needed a whole bunch of stage hands, or, we would tour with one driver, one tour manager, and a roadie. And in the end there, we got down to one person who would do all of it. So we were lean.
Such a great lesson for bands, that is.
Yeah, it's DIY, man. I mean, it's, if you're going to do it yourself, why do it badly?
When was the first time you made it over to the UK with the Presidents? Do you remember any of those early trips?
Yeah. Boy, it's funny. I remember more of the UK from the second phase of the band, from 2003 to 2015. We went a lot, and I loved it. I loved the length of the drives. The people were so great. The food was awesome. Beer was amazing. Countryside's beautiful. We loved touring in the UK so much. Yeah, it was fantastic. It was a dream, because growing up with the Beatles, it was always like this magical land where, is everybody this creative?
Not all of us.
Not all of you. No. But yeah, we loved it. We loved it a lot. But it's funny. I don't have a lot of, the first phase of the band from 94 to 98, there's a lot of blurry years.
Did you ever do like Reading or Glastonbury or anything like that?
No, we never did Reading or Glastonbury. I'm not sure why. I'm trying to think of what festivals. I mean, even later in the 2000s, we did the V Festival. Dave and Jason are way better at remembering venues and festivals. I'm lost in a haze of melodies and lyrics.
It's all good. One of your other projects that's kept you busy for many years, Casper Babypants.
Yes.
Again, another throwback to an earlier nickname, right?
Right. That was my name when I was playing the red guitar behind me that I'm pointing at for all you listening. The original 2-string in a band with Mark Sandman called Supergroup. And we improvised all the songs live. And my stage name was Casper Babypants because I had a pair of baby's pants as a winter hat, which I wore on stage. So yeah, when I was making kids music later, I knew that I was supposed to be doing something else besides the rock band. The rock band to me was great, but it was like painting with primary colors. It's like drums, bass, guitar, yellow, red, blue. I wanted to paint with all the colors in the paint box, classical music, Indian music, like the Beatles did. I wanted to have everything at my fingertips, and I wanted it to be less loud. And so eventually I figured out, kids music or family music for 0 to 5-year-olds. That's what I really should be doing. It was like the innocent core of Planet Presidents without the irony and the sexual innuendo on the outside. It was just the innocent part, and huge volcano of songwriting erupted out of that. So that got me doing Casper Babypants. And yeah, that was amazing. That was the ultimate DIY, the best DIY experience of my life. I ran the whole thing like what I'm doing now. I didn't do any promotion. I just put the music out and patiently waited for a decade for it to kind of find its way, mostly just happy parents telling other parents about it. And I did 1,247 shows. I made 19 albums.
19 albums.
I wrote 352 songs over the course of 12 years, 10 or 12 years. And then one day I was like, actually during the pandemic, I put out 3 records. And then I really was like, that's it. I think I've said it all. 19 albums is respectable.
Did you merchandise the Casper Babypants hats at any point?
No.
Come on.
I did so badly on merch. All I really sold were CDs. And then my wife, Kate, who her artwork was kind of the inspiration for the Casper thing, she did the merch for the Presidents for the last 5 years of us being a band and did great. She was amazing. So she started making t-shirts, managing the merch table and bringing all of her books and artwork. And the merch table became like a massive thing at a Casper show. But for a long time, it was just me and some CDs.
Does her creativity fuel your creativity as well? Do you bounce off each other?
Oh, yeah. I mean, she's my Ringo, man. I mean, apparently it's Ringo who said, it's been a hard day's night. And they're all like, boop. Or he said, tomorrow never knows. Boop. And Kate is the one that was like, my flea has dogs instead of my dog has fleas. And boop. It just says stuff, malapropisms, and gets things reversed. We wrote a bunch of Casper songs together. She was right there in the trenches with me creatively with that too, which was fantastic.
Did you have any reference point for a rock musician doing kids music?
No, and it really wasn't a conscious decision. It found me. I was hunting. This whole message I was getting, what is the other thing I'm supposed to be doing? There's something. I did so many different attempts to figure out what that was. And eventually it got quiet and acoustic. And then a light bulb went off it's kids music. It was sitting there the whole time. So it was really me finding an answer to a gut level question rather than deciding to make music. It's just what happened, I'm definitely finding that being a radar mind and being open to what's going to happen next in an intuitive way really informs where I go. I don't think about it. I feel it. Like this music I'm making now, a couple friends of mine will corroborate this, but about 2 years ago, I had a couple friends over, Barrett from the Screaming Trees and this guy, Pete Droge.
Necktie Second, one of my all-time favorite albums.
There you go. And I said to those guys, I feel something coming. There is some new music coming. It's abstract. It's not about storytelling. It's about impressions. It's groovy and kind of fuzzy. And then it went away. Then it evaporated. I lost the thread. And then it popped back up again. And now I'm on my 3rd record. So it's weird. These things are floating out there and I just have to listen.
I love that. You've officially retired, Casper, I believe, as a recording and touring project, but don't you have something in the works with a UK company? Is it Yoto?
Yeah, it's pronounced Yoto, and it is a UK company and doing really well with them. They make a standalone player for little kids, no screen time, no internet time, but it does have these little LED lights that light up, and you have cards that you put in that are full of either stories or music or whatever. You can put whatever you want, geography lessons or whatever. And the little player plays the cards. It's got a couple speakers in it and these little knobs. So it's a way for kids to have a device that is not a device.
Did they approach you? Had they heard your music?
Yeah, they approached me and we made a bunch of cards and they're selling like crazy. The Beatles card is selling really well in the UK. Although actually, I don't know if we can do, it's one of the territories I think we can't do the Beatles cards in America. We can do them in the UK, something like that. Anyway, yeah, it's real good. I'm excited about that partnership. We're talking about making more cards now, actually. Yeah, it's kind of great. And then I'm working on a Casper Babypants TV show.
See, it's still living.
It's still living. It's still living. But, a TV show, I've approached the TV show idea 9 times and it never works out for so many reasons. And I'm secretly relieved when it doesn't. But this time I have set the bar super high. I'm like, I'm not doing it unless we get like a Spike Jonze or a Michelle Gondry or a Charlie Kaufman or somebody who is like a brilliant genius at taking one form of intellectual property and shepherding it to another form. because if we don't have a genius behind this, it's just going to be regular, and I don't want to do regular. I feel like the show is happening in children's minds already when they listen to the songs. That is the show. So to solidify it into an actual show, it's going to be very abstract, and I won't go into it because it's kind of complicated, but it's hovering out there. It's on the desk of creatives in LA, and I'm waiting for them to come back to me with things, and we'll see.
How many shows was it you said you did with Casper Babypants? 1,000 and...
1,247.
Have you described the young audience of kids to be as punk rock as teenagers and adults are?
Yeah, they really are. They're more punk rock. I mean, I've never had someone at a punk rock show come up and say, excuse me, excuse me, excuse me, excuse me, excuse me, excuse me, till I say what? And they say, my jacket's red, which it was. My favorite excuse me was, excuse me, excuse me, excuse me, excuse me, for like 3 songs. I was like, I'm just going to see how many excuse me's I can get out of this kid. And eventually I stopped the 3rd song in the middle. I'm like, I can't deal with it anymore. What is it? He's like, can I have a turn? So I put him on my stool. I gave him my guitar. I walked away. He's like, playing, 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 playing. Okay, thank you. And I got my guitar back and finished the song. About 3 days later, I was seeing Soundgarden at a small club. They did like a kind of secret show, and I got in, and me and Kate were up front. And I was thinking, God, wouldn't it be amazing if I went up to Kim and I'm like, excuse me, excuse me, excuse me, excuse me, excuse me, Kim Fowl, can I have a turn? I mean, you just wouldn't do that. So that's how punk rock they are.
So kind of just to wrap things up, off the top of your head, could you recall your most intimidating crowd in the Presidents and the toughest one for Casper? And which would you least like to do again?
Wow. That's an interesting question, because I really don't ever think of the crowd in terms of intimidation. I guess it would be in New York in the 90s when we were just signed or before signing. We were doing a showcase at a club called Brownies. And we had heard about how stiff the New York crowd could be, how kind of like, here we are now, entertain us. But our way of dealing with that was to just, I don't care. We don't care. They're people. Beyond the artifice of the culture of New York, they're just people. And so we just treated them like people, and they started moving. And I mean, not a lot. Like, we were used to crowds really like, moving. And we got off afterwards and we're like, yeah, they loosened up. And people from New York, like our publicist or people from the label, were just like, I've never seen a New York crowd move like that. They weren't that much, but okay. And then with Casper, I think it was sometimes the shows where something happened, like the Mariners, our baseball team, were in the playoffs, or there was some big sporting event, like football game, that I had accidentally scheduled a show during, and I'd get like 2 kids. After, most of my shows were like high energy punk rock environments. If 4 kids showed up, I'd get to know all their names. They'd request songs. We'd have like a rapport. I'd work their names into the songs. We even had this in the Presidents at the very beginning, which is like, you play for who's there, not for who isn't there.
That's always been my mantra. Somebody told me years ago, it's not their fault that nobody else turned up.
Yeah. We did do one show. Presidents did one show. This might be it, in Atlanta. We were scheduled to play in Atlanta. We were in California, and we didn't want to do it. And Dave didn't feel well. And he felt well enough to maybe do the show, but we kind of said, Dave's sick. We're not going to come. They could tell we were not 100% genuine, and they just got mad, the radio station that we were supposed to do a show for. So when we came to Atlanta, eventually to play our own show, they publicized the wrong date and the wrong time and the wrong venue. So when we actually took the stage in this giant hall, there were like 60 people. And that was a shock at first. But then again, we were like, let's just put on a kick-ass rock show for these 60 people.
Probably one of their most favorite gigs ever they attended.
Oh, I still remember it. It was fantastic. So anyway, sorry to disappoint, but I don't think there's any such thing as an intimidating audience.
I'll take it. That's a great way of answering it. Chris, thank you for your time, mate. I've loved chatting with you. Very best of luck with the new album.
Thank you. I give this music away for free, along with a ton of other free music on chrisballew.org. I've got ambient meditation music. I've got all these weird old cassettes from the 90s that I made. Crazy stuff. So yeah, go get it all for free. Or if you prefer, you can get it at Apple Music and buy it and stuff like that. But you can download it all for free from my website.
Absolute legend, man. You're doing a good thing. Very inspiring.
I appreciate that. It's the least I could do. I'm sorry for all the rigmarole scheduling, and I appreciate your flexibility and patience.
All right, man. Well, you enjoy the rest of your day. Take care. I'll speak to you soon.
All right, Rob. Yeah, really great. Give the UK a big wet kiss for me.
Huge thanks to Chris Ballew for such a fun conversation here on the Straight to Video podcast. If you enjoyed the presidents of the United States of America but have been unfamiliar with what he's been up to since, I urge you to head on over to chrisballew.org and fill your boots with as much music as you can get your hands on and support such a great creative artist. His new album Primitive God is available there to download for free, but that's just really scratching the surface on what he has available. Alright, this time next week, the Straight to Video podcast will have hit 200 episodes. Thank you so much for getting us to this point, not just with the podcast, but with everything Straight to Video related, the music, the new 80s video shop in Alfreton, Derbyshire. Your passion fuels my passion, and it's great to do it with you. So head on over to stvpod.com for all previous episodes, music downloads, merchandise, and please seek out 80s Video Shop on all social media because that is growing at a massive pace too, which is pretty exciting. But right now, that is all for this episode. I'll see you at number 200.